long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series. My name is constant reader Scott Daly of Texas, and this is my co-host and tetmate, Matt Freeman of Midworld.
Colorado?
What's that?
I'm in Colorado.
Is that like a barony of Midworld?
You know what? Sure. I'm Matt Freeman of the Midworld Barony of Colorado.
Great. Perfect. This week on the show, we are finishing up with Book 3 of The Dark Tower, Matt. The Wastelands. We're finishing it this week. This is it. 3 books.
Exciting.
Yeah, we're covering Chapter 6, Riddle and Wastelands, the final chapter of Book 3, The Wastelands. The quartet is reunited again, and they solve Blaine's tricky riddle and prime the pump. Blaine opens up, and they all aboard just in time to watch the citizens of Lud get gassed to death. Then, it's a quick trip over the Wastelands and a riddling game between Roland and Blaine. Turns out riddles are serious business. Matt, what did you think about this week's reading?
So it's my understanding that this is an unusual opinion, but I found it very satisfying, actually. They get on the train, they leave Lud suffocating to death behind them, and they go out into the shocking hellscape of the Wastelands and then verbally maneuver Blaine into not just in basically like, you know, not killing him immediately, in a really, really excellent scene. You know, I mean, I think every series of books is going to end on something unresolved between books, and I was really, really okay with the book ending this way. Sure.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know if I would say that that's an unusual opinion, but I do think that, like, there were some people out there, especially if you're, I mean, imagine there's five years between this book and the fourth book, right? That this whole Blaine thing ends on a cliffhanger, and you got to wait not 2 weeks to find out what happens, but 5 years. So I think that's the frustration that people had. For you and I, this is nothing. We can wait a couple weeks to find out the resolution of this conflict. And I do agree with you. I think it's a satisfying cliffhanger, but I can understand why a lot of people are like, no, how did you end the book this way? No.
Yes, no shade on anybody who had to actually wait 5 years between books. I mean, I think we all know that pain. I mean, we relatively recently became aware of the Kingkiller Chronicles, and that's already starting to wear on me. But yeah, for me, I was just like, I love this ending. Actually, I love the whole ending bit part of this book. It was really fun for me.
That's awesome. I look forward to getting into it with you and talking about exactly why you loved it. So let's go ahead and start doing that.
Okay.
Before we do that, though, we do have some announcements. For those of you that have just joined us for the first time and maybe marathon through and skipped the overview episodes we do, whenever we finish a book in the series, we do have one more episode where we look back on the book as a whole and talk about it one last time, talk about it as a whole book and not just one chapter or 2 chapters or whatever. So that's what we're going to be doing next week. We are not moving on to Wizard and Glass just yet. We're going to be talking about this book one last time. We're going to talk about themes. I think Matt and I both agreed on air to read a poem. So we have to actually go do that and try to understand this poem.
Yeah, we've got a week. I'm sure we can read this inscrutable poem in a week.
Yeah. We're also, we have a special guest next week. I'm not going to announce who just yet, but someone that's I think as into Stephen King and the Dark Tower as I am, and as you will one day be, Matt. I'm very excited to talk to this guest about this book and the first 3 books as a whole. It's going to be a lot of fun. So tune in next week. Sorry for those of you that wanted us to move right into Wizard and Glass. You're going to have to wait a little bit longer.
Yeah.
All right. Before that, though, we got to finish up this book, and let's do it with Chapter 6, Riddle and Wastelands. Matt, we begin this final chapter of the book with Roland and the rest of the quartet tackling Blaine's riddle, which, as we are reminded here, is he said we'd have to prime the pump to get him going. Only his pump primes backwards. Matt, did you unlock this one before the book did? I found this one pretty. I actually honestly did not remember the solution to this one when I was reading the previous chapter before getting onto this one.
I didn't, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I did try to check, but maybe I just missed it. You don't actually do we not actually see any reference to the fact that there's a number pad before this chapter?
No, there is.
There is.
I pulled the picture of the number pad with the prime numbers left on it. The number pad itself is earlier in the chapter. This is what happens when you audiobook, Matt.
I guess so.
They actually
But yeah, okay, go ahead.
No, it's just King, like he's done many times throughout this book, he put a picture of what we were looking at in the actual book itself. We saw a picture of what the key looked like. We saw a picture of what Roland's drawing of the beam and the Guardians looked like, and now we saw this number pad both before and after Susanna finished charcoaling off the non-prime numbers.
Well, no, I got no excuse.
Maybe you would have guessed it had you been reading, if you had remembered that keypad. Maybe. Yeah,
maybe so. I don't know. It's I think this is what I've remarked before is like Roland has the same problem with riddles that I do, which is being overly literal. Yeah. And so like when you say the pump primes backwards, I like literally start imagining like, okay, how do you prime a pump backwards? And of course the answer is it's not actually a pump. Like there's no pump being primed at all. It's just a play on words. It's just the primes backwards to activate the code. Yeah, sure, that's it. Sure.
Yeah, so the Tet decides pretty quickly that it must have something to do with the number pad, with the 1 to 100 number pad standing in front of him, but they can't quite get it. Nobody can get it. And then suddenly Susanna steps up and asks Roland for help. And then we get this wonderful line here. The daydream look was being replaced by an expression of mingled horror, dismay, and determination. To Roland's eye, she had never looked more beautiful or more alone. She had been on his shoulders when they stood at the edge of the clearing and watched the bear trying to claw Eddie out of the tree, and Roland had not seen her expression when he told her she must be the one to shoot it. But he knew what that expression had been, for he was seeing it now. Ka was a wheel, its one purpose to turn, and in the end it always came back to the place where it had started. So it had ever been, and so it was now. Susanna was once again facing the bear, and her face said she knew it. So this is the last chapter of the book, right? And so we're doing a lot of wrapping up of characters. And this is, I think, one of the most textual examples of that, where we are literally going back to Susanna's first moment in the book and connecting it through this statement, Ka is a wheel, to the choice and the thing she does here at the end of the book.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I wanted to latch onto this phrase, Ka is a wheel, because I don't remember it ever being characterized this way before. Like its one purpose is to turn. It always comes back to where it started. First of all, that's really interesting in context of our discussion about the idea of karma and the comparison between Ka and karma, because there's definitely a lot of kind of cyclic imagery and concepts tied to the idea of karma. So that's just another kind of piece of information about Ka that I'm having to add into my mental encyclopedia of how exactly I should think of Ka.
Yeah. This is the first time, I believe, and I didn't triple check this before I'm saying this, so if I'm wrong, please feel free to point that out, listeners, but I think this is the first time that phrase is used in the series, Ka is a wheel. So yeah, we are kind of once again adding another wrinkle onto this mystical force that is seemingly both controlling everything and leaving you up to your own worst instincts at the same time.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think it is really fun how King has kind of done this fun metatextual trick that you just pointed out of saying, hey, remember at the beginning of the book? We're coming back around to that moment here.
Yeah.
And it works, right? It works really well.
It does. And it once again gives Susanna something to do, which I think earlier in the book we had, not complaining is the wrong word, but had commented that some of the other characters were getting so much more stuff to do than she was. But, since they've gotten to Lud, I think Susanna has been like clutch in every possible way. She's been phenomenal. Yeah.
In fact, I might even say, having the whole book under my belt now, that Eddie kind of dominates the first half of the book, but I think Susanna, she doesn't dominate it in the same way, but I think that she comes into more focus in the latter half.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think once you disconnect the book from the importance of the Eddie-Jake relationship as far as getting Jake to Midworld, I think she's able to get much more focus. And really, really shines. I love her in the back half of this book.
Me too.
So Susanna wants Roland to hypnotize her with this whole like dancing cartridge trick to remember the voice of her father. But interestingly enough, Matt, it's not Susanna that hears that voice. It's actually Detta Walker talking about the 4 special numbers, the prime numbers, which is a great reveal. But I mean, it's interesting that it comes from the voice of Detta, not Susanna.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I also think it's kind of interesting that Susanna needs the hypnotism magic to get access to these memories and to Detta. It kind of implies that she's always right there, and not only that she's right there, but that she is like the one who has access to these memories. Like they're Susanna's memories, quote unquote, but Detta is the one who actually is just like, oh yeah, of course I remember that. Oh, of course I do. It's very, very interesting.
I do think it's interesting as well that like Susanna has called upon Detta Walker a few times in the book now, but not so with Odetta Holmes. Like Odetta Holmes has not been tapped to, okay, I need this part of my personality that I can only access through Odetta Holmes, and therefore I need to bring that person back. That's not been the case.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really love, though, while this is Detta Walker, it's also textually not Detta Walker, right? Like there are several beats throughout this early part of the chapter that King makes it very clear that this is not the same person we saw on the beach. Like this line here, except she was not Susanna, nor was she the same wretched, devilish creature who had previously gone under the name Detta Walker, although she sounded the same. And then we have Detta threw back her head and laughed, but the poisoned, half-mad bitterness was gone from the sound. She sounded genuinely amused at the foolishness. And then this one moment, that's because you're just a stupid white boy, Detta said, but not unkindly. And I think that's just like King hits this beat multiple times to really get us to see you are not supposed to be looking at this Detta in the same way that we looked at Detta Walker back in part 2 of the Drawing of the Three.
Absolutely. She's not the same evil demon. Her opinions seem much more nuanced. And, you know, she seems like she's somewhere between that Detta and Susanna. In the process of like integrating and blending, maybe. I do think that this is really interesting, and I wonder where we're going with it, because I mean, for one thing, it emphasizes yet again the way in which Susanna can kind of tap into the more Detta-ish aspects of her personality as needed, basically tapping into that steel or that knowledge or whatever it is. And, you know, I think it's also interesting that this scene is following relatively soon after the scene where Susanna remarks that she sort of despises both Odetta and Detta for different reasons. And I do find myself wondering, like you mentioned a second ago, whether there might be a time when she needs to tap into Odetta, because like surely Odetta, you know, I mean, Odetta had some positive qualities. Like Eddie fell in love with Odetta. So like maybe those positive qualities might be valuable in some circumstances, or maybe Susanna might find herself tipping too much into darkness if she continually kind of indulges in Detta's, you know, maybe more obvious kinds of strength, but doesn't, you know, balance it out with Odetta's empathy and compassion.
Right. Yeah. Because I do think like this idea that, you know, when we first met Detta Walker, one of the first things Roland said was this person could be valuable if she could be tempered in some way, you know, the problem is she's incredibly out of control. She's uncontrollable. Like she can't be relied on. She can't be trusted. And we see here that through Susanna, like we kind of are having our cake and eating it too. Like we get all the good qualities of Detta Walker with none of the drawbacks. And so I think the question you need to ask yourself is, are we just not seeing the drawbacks? Is there going to be consequences based on this that we haven't seen yet? I mean, those are, I think, questions that you're supposed to be asking yourself right now.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's where my head went anyway, because I don't know if I fully trust Detta's being reformed. You know what I mean? Like
she's Detta, but she's good now.
Yeah. And I'm always like, okay, I'll tentatively accept that.
Sure. Yeah. So Detta / Susanna, because she like transforms back midway through the conversation, but she explains how prime numbers work and how to remember them. And all while she's doing this, she's taken out like a piece of like a stick of charcoal and is marking out the non-prime numbers on that central console. So we get left with our prime numbers 1 through 97 of every single prime number. And it's a neat riddle. But I kind of agree with you that it's like not like it's not the type of riddle I find fun.
Yeah, well, also like first of all, it's actually just kind of weird to have a train that has a password that is like 20 digits long.
Yeah.
and right next to the train. Well, so also I'm trying to figure out what, if anything, is up with the numbers being arranged in a diamond. So like, I don't know. I assume most people read the book, I guess, but rather than the audiobook. And of course the audiobook does say that the numbers are arranged in a diamond, but I don't know if I was visualizing the right thing when the book says that. So the numbers are literally like 1, and then the next row 2, 3, and then the next row 4, 5, 6, and expands out, and then it shrinks again. And I was like, man, that's a weird way to have a number pad. Like, for one thing, it makes this net of Eratosthenes really tricky to draw. Like, you can't just strike a line through all the even numbers, for one thing. You have to like pick them out individually. So I just thought it was interesting, and I didn't know what to make of it.
Sure. Yeah, and I wonder if we're supposed to think that did the old ones, is this how they got on the train every time, or is this just something that Blaine decided to do because he's a pain?
Honestly, that did sort of occur to me. Like, I bet Blaine changed the password to just be a giant pain in the ass.
Yeah. It seems like a very Blaine thing to do, for sure.
Yeah.
So Susanna is about to start pressing the prime numbers when Jake pops in and reminds her that the pump primes backwards, so they can't just go 1 through 97. They have to go 97 back down to 1. The funny thing about the scene, Matt, is every one of our Katet plays a scene, right? I think it's Roland who first goes, it must be something to do with these numbers on this panel. It must be a code of some sort. And Susanna's the one that comes up with the prime numbers, and then Jake is the one that reminds about the pump priming backwards. But we're leaving someone out here. Because Eddie just does nothing in this whole puzzle. It's like the Katet is coming together to solve the puzzle, and Eddie's just there.
He's still not one for riddling, is he?
No, he's not. He just he has trouble with the riddles, for sure.
I mean, honestly, like, I probably would have predicted that like by the end of this book, Eddie's gonna just be really clutch and come up with the riddle answer they really needed, and he just kind of did not. I think he knew he knew one riddle that Blaine didn't know, right? Is that true? Or
no,
he knew one riddle that Roland didn't know, and that was a while ago.
Correct.
And that didn't really matter.
Correct.
So yeah, it is interesting. I mean, it's funny on one level because you're just like, oh, Eddie, you're our lovable dummy Eddie, but also you're just like, well, I mean, it ended up being sort of significant, actually, that Roland was mad at him for not caring about riddles. And then his not caring about riddles continues to sort of be a problem for their team.
Yeah.
And, in contrast, we see directly how important riddles actually did turn out to be. Roland couldn't possibly be more right.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's great. I mean, and it's like, I like, we've talked about this a lot, but I think it is interesting the ways in which, especially when you're looking back on the book after having finished it, the ways in which King is balancing character moments. Because Eddie, on the other hand, like we were talking about Susanna, Eddie, on the other hand, has had some moments since Jake's drawing, but like we said after we finished that chapter, is the first half of the book is really his, and then he's just kind of faded a little bit, not too much, but a little bit into the background to let the other characters get some more light. And I mean, I think that's a tough balancing act, right? You want to give all your characters important moments. They can't all come at the same time normally. So you have to figure out kind of how to balance them in a way that feels satisfying for your reader, that feels like we just don't leave one character behind for an entire book. And I think he succeeds at that.
That's a good point. I mean, I guess it might be fair to just say, like, the only reason why we're even noticing that Eddie didn't play a role here is that he has kind of disproportionately played roles in a lot of things throughout the story. Like, it's not like he's been useless this book. He was the one who carved the key. He drew Jake and everything. So
yeah.
It's see, you've given me an interesting lens now. So now I'm like, well, is he actually? I guess it's just funny to note, like, everyone chiming in on the riddles and him just not at all, and it makes it really obvious that this is just not his thing. Yeah, I mean,
I love that every character has their strengths and weaknesses, and we don't short circuit those weaknesses just to make them involved. Like, we don't abandon the character for the sake of the plot. Sometimes, like, Eddie can't help here because he just is not very good at it, and that's okay. Because there are tons of things that Susanna can't help with because she's not very good at them. There's tons of things that Jake can't help with because he's not good at them.
And that's what Katet is all about.
Yeah.
he said, barely knowing what that meant.
I mean, you're right, though.
But good.
So having got the riddle correctly, the door to Blaine the Mono slides open, and the Katet rushes on board. At first, the voice of Little Blaine speaks to them in kind of a pre-recorded dialogue, where it says, "Welcome to Blaine," a soothing voice said as they pelted aboard. They all recognized that voice. It was a slightly louder, slightly more confident version of Little Blaine. "Praise the Imperium. Please make sure your transit card is available for collection, and remember that false boarding is a serious crime punishable by law. We hope you enjoy your trip." Blaine cuts that off and then pressurizes the cabin just as explosions rip across the city.
The voice actor in the audiobook made me laugh a number of times in this chapter. I think starting with Blaine interrupting himself with, "I think we can dispense with that boring old shit, don't you?" I don't even know why. I think I just enjoy interrupting humor.
Yeah,
as a genre.
It's good, but I also just think I think Blaine is a very classic Stephen King antagonist, where he's just fun in ways that are enjoyable to read, but also when you think about them super disturbing. You would not expect the train antagonist to be this kind of hilarious, kind of sarcastic character. But here he is, or he's exactly that. He's just he's funny and weird, and it's horrifying in a lot of ways because he's doing these terrible things. But it's also I think it makes it more uncomfortable because it's almost kind of arresting the ways in which he's not what you would expect.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I expected something way more overtly transparently demonic, based on everything in the story, based on the book, the Charlie the Choo Choo book, based on the picture on the cover, which I'm going to stop mentioning. But there's been so much ominousness around Blaine that you're just kind of taken off guard by how comical he is. And it's not that he's not doing horrible shit. He kills the entire city. He massacres. He massacres, I don't know, tens of thousands of people. Maybe, I'm not sure how many people live there, but it's a horrifying thing he does. I think that but like you said, he's sort of he's got this wacky personality that is, it's like the Joker almost, where I'm fumbling to put my finger on it exactly, because it is this very ineffable thing where he can both make you laugh and sort of make you squirm at the same time, and I think that's really effective. He's goofy, and I love Eddie's comment here where he thinks silently to himself is, "Anyone who thinks impressions of old movie actors is funny absolutely cannot be trusted." I think it's a law of nature. It's the perfect way of describing this kind of goofy, weird villain. I like it. Yes. So they finally get a look around the cabin, and they see how beautiful it is inside Blaine. The Barony cabin is described by Blaine as basically the equivalent to first class in our world, complete with a chandelier on the ceiling. Jake notices just perfectly matches the one that he saw on the floor of the Dutch Hill, or no, he grabbed onto it. It was still on the ceiling in the Dutch Hill house. And this is one of my favorite lines in the book. Nor did this surprise him. He had begun to take such connections and doublings as a matter of course. So even Jake at this point is yeah, okay, I get it. Everything's connected. I got it. Yeah. Right. And not even wondering about how did that happen?
What does that mean? Yeah.
Ka, I get it.
But sorry, go ahead.
I really do wonder how Ka, this pattern of giving the characters these cues and these clues, will develop and evolve as the story goes on, because it's already become quite a bit more central and more complex than I would have expected.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, because in the first book, in Gunslinger, Ka was just this thing that Roland referenced every so often, as we talked about at the time, maybe a justification for the choices he was making. But especially this book, it has seized our characters and their story at a much more intimate level. So I think you're right.
Yeah. I think now that they're all, I think the difference now, the difference between the beginning of this book and the end of it is that now all of the characters acknowledge that it is a thing, have seen a billion examples of it, and are just they're sort of becoming more like Roland, where they're actually kind of paying attention and like watching out for it. And that's kind of what I mean when I say I'm interested to see where it goes from here, because presumably they're just going to become more, I don't know if reliant on it is the right word, but they're going to have more of a relationship with it rather than just kind of starting to be acquainted with it as they are here.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, and I think this is the last nail in the coffin of the concept that this Dutch Hill house is not, like, we already knew it wasn't a normal house because it literally turns into a monster, but like it's just, the book has gone over time to really sell this idea that, hey, this is specifically connected to Midworld more so than it is to its own world. Everything in here seems more closely connected to Midworld than it is ours.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it had monster spiders in it too. Like, I think there's in some sense the whole house is a door.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
Also, cool. Blaine has carved an exquisite ice sculpture of Roland. What do you think about that, man?
I don't really have a clever response for this, Scott. I thought about it for a while. I was like, it reminded me very much of the giant statue. Of course, I think maybe that's what you're like first meant to think about, is like basically sitting on top of Blaine for all intents and purposes is this giant gold statue of Roland. He's bestride everything. He's this giant, Jupiter-like figure, if you will.
Above the Beam Guardians. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Super powerful imagery, and the one of them who Blaine chooses to carve is Roland, the gunslinger, which is funny because they all claim to be gunslingers at this point, but he's like, yeah, Roland, you're the gunslinger. And Roland is the only one that he carved, and it's in that same classic, he even looks like the gunslinger carving, right? He has the hat. He is missing the fingers like Roland, but he also looks like the carving. Yeah. Or the statue, I mean.
And he's drawing a horse, which like that's something that we've never, it's interesting because it's current Roland because he's missing the fingers, but he's drawing a horse in which we've never seen Roland have a horse. The most he had was a mule back in the Gunslinger. We've never seen him with an actual horse. So, I don't know. I mean, and the most nerdy part of me was also like, how the fuck did he carve this thing? Like, what? Like, did like carving attachments come out of the walls? Like, how did this work?
Lasers.
Of course, he just dropped a block of ice onto the train that he just had.
I mean, I sort of assumed that that's just one of the things that the Barony cabin has, is like, we make ice sculptures on demand, because
that would be great.
It's the future.
I kind of love that it's not explained. Like, I kind of love that like the book doesn't say like explain like, oh well, yes, exactly what you said, that this is a feature of the Barony cabin. I just love that it's just there and everyone's just like, okay. And then several times throughout this following scene, we cut back to it and like see that it's melting a little bit and little bits of water are dripping off of Roland as he's like talking down to Blaine. It's just wonderful. It's great.
I love it too.
So the Tet takes their seats and asks Blaine where we're going. And Blaine replies, along the path of the beam, at least as far along it as my track goes. To the Dark Tower? Roland asked. Susanna realized it was the first time the gunslinger had actually spoken to the loquacious ghost inside the machine below Lud. Only as far as Topeka, Jake said in a low voice. Yes, Blaine said. Topeka is the name of my terminating point, although I am surprised you know it. So Matt, Topeka, the capital of Kansas, is where Blaine is going.
Well, or a city called Topeka. We'll see, I guess.
So we have to say that the reason why Jake thinks this is because that's where Charlie the Choo-Choo was going in the book, right?
Yeah.
He was going to Topeka. That was the whole thing in the book. So that's why Jake says this, but it's true here.
Yeah. Right. I mean, there's been a few times in this book where Jake has gotten like confused about like thinking he's in the Midwest instead of the Midworld,
Yeah, he's looked out. He's looked at. I think when he saw the bridge, one of the first things he said is, "What is the George Washington Bridge doing in Kansas?"
Yeah.
And everyone was like, "What?" He's like, never mind.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. We'll see how directly that relates. One thing I literally don't remember if we've talked much about the Wizard of Oz as a point of reference for this story. We may have mentioned it.
Yeah,
we may not have.
The characters mention it very briefly.
The characters mention it.
I think Eddie like says it in one of his pop culture references, and they briefly explain what it is to Roland.
Okay. Yes. Well, this seems like a time to mention it because I mean, like we're not in Kansas anymore is an immediate phrase that comes to mind when you're talking about a story where people are like traveling between worlds. I mean, Wizard of Oz is a story about a girl who is drawn into another world, forms a quartet, and defeats a witch and a wizard.
Yeah, and she has a little dog too.
She has a little dog companion. She has. I mean, I'm not quick enough on my feet to draw the connections between the lion and Eddie and so forth. But anyway,
should we pause the podcast and give you time to draw those connections? I'm just kidding. We don't have to.
Not sure if they're there. But I mean, the point is that Wizard of Oz, at least on the surface, seems to have a lot of similarities. I'm wondering, the yellow brick road, right? They follow the yellow brick road. You have to follow the yellow brick road to get to the city. I mean, that sounds very much like the beam, right? The path of the beam, and you stay on the yellow brick road. Like so I feel like this is another thing like Lord of the Rings where we can probably find a bunch of fun and suggestive connections between that and this story. And I don't know, it's the first time it's occurred to me here is this moment where this really overt connection to Kansas has been made. Yeah.
I think that's great. It's a lot of fun, and I think we should try to pay attention to that as we go forward. But yeah, I mean, I feel like Stephen King is a smart enough author to know when you start involving Kansas, you're gonna draw those connections, especially since he did earlier in the book specifically name drop the Wizard of Oz. I mean, this is a conversation that three of our characters have had. So you could argue that was a kind of sly setup for you to be thinking along that line when this happens. I think you'd be right to say that. I think that's what he was going for. Yeah.
See, now I actually want to take it a step further though, because because within today's discussion, we'll have this moment where Susanna like explicitly acknowledges Tolkien. We have this idea that maybe there's a relationship to the Wizard of Oz. We had a separate moment last week where Susanna thinks to herself something along the lines of the man who wrote that poem clearly had familiarity with Midworld, speaking about the wastelands.
Sure.
And I'm like, what if that's like literally the implication is that like all of these works of fiction are like either direct experiences or like psychic echoes of this of Midworld into our world that are being channeled by these different authors of these important stories about people stepping between worlds and about devastation, and about great forces of destruction. Like what if that's textual? What if within the story, the reason why we have the Wizard of Oz and Lord of the Rings and the Wastelands is because those authors were inspired by Midworld in some sense. Anyway, that's my theory for the day.
That's cool. That's all I can say is that's cool.
Cool.
This is for those of you that don't know what it's like to do this podcast. Sometimes my role in this is just to say nothing and move on to the next thing.
It's true. Like this.
Yeah. So next, we have this wonderful quote from Jake, where I think this is right after Jake learns about Topeka, and he's kind of just thinking to himself. And it says, "With all you know about our world," Jake thought, "how come you don't know that some lady wrote a book about you, Blaine? Was it the name change? Was something that simple enough to fool a complicated machine like you into overlooking your own biography? What about Beryl Evans, the woman who supposedly wrote Charlie the Choo-Choo? Did you know her, Blaine? And where is she now?" I mean, this, I think, slots pretty neatly into what you were just talking about, Matt. But also, I do see this as King, like, acknowledging that we have these kind of dangling story items like what's going on with this Charlie the Choo Choo book, and just like acknowledging to the reader, hey, I know this stuff is still there. I acknowledge that there are open questions in the story still, and I'm going to make those open questions textual as a way of maybe signaling to my readers, don't worry, we're going to deal with this stuff later. I am acknowledging that that I'm about to leave this book without these answered. It's okay. I'm on your side here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, because after a certain amount of weirdness and coincidences, I think that I'm not annoyed, but I think that some reader somewhere in the world might be like, come on, like, did you just adding more and more weird like coincidences? What does this mean? Where are we going with this? I hope you're not going to pull a Lost on us, King. And here King is like you just said, saying like, yep, I know I'm doing this, and I wouldn't say that he's promising that he's going to answer these specific mysteries. I think that would be, I mean, maybe he will, but I don't think he's promising that. I think what he's saying is like, yes, you noticed that? Good. You were supposed to.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. This is not a promise of resolution. It's an acknowledgement of open mysteries. Yeah. Cool. All right. So right as the train begins to pull away, Susanna realizes that they left her wheelchair behind. So say goodbye to the wheelchair, Matt.
Bye-bye.
This is probably going to be a problem later, right?
I'm sure they'll have no trouble finding another wheelchair in the upcoming inhospitable wastes.
Did you notice this? Because actually this is something that I've read these books many times, but even still going through them in preparation for the show, I read it just straight through. The first time I read the chapter, and then I go back through the chapter after and take notes and write stuff down that I want to talk about. And the first time I went through this part in particular, I noticed that she was carried on to the train, and I had forgotten that she loses her wheelchair here. And I was just like, Suzanne, she left her. Is anyone going to notice that her wheelchair is not there? Because they carried her on and set her down in a chair. Anyone? And then I was like, oh yeah, okay, I remember now. I think that's kind of fun that like, yeah. Sometimes like I wonder if that's the type of thing that's a little bit difficult to manage as an author, where sometimes you want those moments where your readers like catch wind of something before your characters do. And like, I think he does kind of telegraph that her chair is not here without being explicit about it.
Yeah. It's, I mean, obviously you're right, because it is in there to notice if you're keen to notice it, because the text makes kind of a big deal about what a hassle it is to get both Susanna and the wheelchair up the staircase.
Right.
So like pretty immediately prior to this scene, we have had a lot of attention paid to the idea of like, oh man, it's really always got to schlep that wheelchair around. and now it's just no mention of the wheelchair. And yep, they forgot it. Yep. So I feel like he handled it very well, actually.
Yeah. And it's very interesting to me that the wheelchair has been this key item in the story, but it's also a big hassle. So like you're half like, oh, thank God we don't have to carry that thing around anymore. But you're also like, oh no, we got to carry Susanna around now. Like it's both in an interesting way.
Yeah. It's a good point.
Mm-hmm. All right. So Blaine then shows off the visual mode of the Barony cabin, in which the walls and the floor and the ceiling of the cabin all vanish, and it looks like all the furniture just floating on thin air, as well as all of our characters, and they can see Lud all around them. I love, like, there's a lot of opposing tone management here, because like the cabin is beautiful, the ice sculpture is beautiful, the view from Blaine as it speeds along its track, I think even Susanna says it's beautiful, and yet as they look out upon Lud as they leave it, they see this purple gas spread through the city, killing people in a brutal fashion. They're screaming, they're crawling, they're clawing at their throats. These are hard deaths. These are not quick deaths. And I think it's so wonderful that like we get this kind of back and forth. Like this view is beautiful. It's a technological marvel, and then look what it has wrought. I think it's a great contradiction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I love this writing. This is more great descriptive writing, which I think that's one of the fun things about this podcast is the opportunity to talk about the descriptive writing that King has executed. I thought these were, both the part where they are still near Lud and they're able to look at kind of this beautiful landscape, and then of course the part after they cross over this barrier and they're in the wastelands, both extremely almost jarringly good pieces of descriptive writing and scene setting.
Yeah, love it. And then Blaine makes a route map appear on the front of the train and has this to say, and I think this is worth talking about. You are looking at the route of travel. Although there are some twists and turns along the bunny trail, you will note that our course keeps firmly to the southwest, along the path of the beam. The total distance is just over 8,000 wheels, or 7,000 miles if you prefer that unit of measure. It was once much less, but that was before all temporal synapses began to melt down. Synapses. So we've been talking about the ways in which the world is changing, right? And I love the way Blaine describes it here is almost like a technology failure and less of a magic metaphysical nonsensey stuff. So synapses are literally in a brain. The synapses are the connections between neurons, right? So
you can maybe say let's generalize that to the idea of connections between things. So you're saying the connections between. So, I mean, temporal means time. Mm-hmm. So the connections between things that keep track of time are breaking down. I mean, part of me wants to say but also this is kind of a technobabble nonsense thing to say anyway. Mm-hmm. But you're exactly right, though, that this is something we've noticed more and more throughout the latter half of this book, is that a lot of stuff that seemed either demonic or magical or what have you, it seems more and more likely that it is actually AI and high technology that has gone awry. And maybe if there is magic to it, then it could even just be that Arthur C. Clarke, I believe, quote of, sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So that could be what all of this is. And I love this stuff. I continue to love this stuff.
Yeah. I really latched on to the meltdown, which has a very specific, it's not just breakdown. Meltdown is very specific. It feels like failure in something breaking and not a natural breakdown of something.
Well, yeah, I mean the key connection is to nuclear reactors.
Right. Yeah. So the journey to Topeka will take 8 hours and 45 minutes, and the train will be traveling at a little bit over 800 miles per hour. And Blaine, of course, has no idea if that track is stable.
Oh, Blaine. So I just had to look some things up because I wanted to know how to think about this. So because I don't necessarily remember all these numbers. So the Earth is 25,000 miles in diameter. So the distance from Lud to Topeka is basically the same as the distance from Miami to Mumbai. It's a good chunk of the way around the world.
Sure.
And of course, Midworld is weird. It's getting bigger or something. May literally not be round. We don't know. I mean, we talked before about the idea that maybe Midworld is flat or the directions don't make sense. And I also, they're going to be on the train for 8 hours and 45 minutes. I was like, oh my God, are they going to be doing riddles this whole time?
I mean, that's what they agreed to.
It is. Yeah. It becomes like a marathon of riddles at a certain point.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's fun.
Yeah. So they ask Blaine, well, what happens if a piece of the track up ahead is falling out? What'll happen? And Blaine asks, at 800 miles an hour? See you later, alligator. After a while, crocodile. Don't forget to write. Come on, Eddie said. Don't tell me a machine as sophisticated as you can't monitor your own trackage for brakes. Well, I could have, Blaine agreed. But, aw, shucks. I blew those circuits out when we started to move. Eddie's face was a picture of astonishment. Why? It's quite a bit more exciting this way, don't you think? I love Blaine. I love Blaine so much.
Oh, me too.
We didn't talk about this last week, but the see you later alligator after a while crocodile thing is something that Blaine uses multiple times, and he's going to use it a few more in this chapter. And I think this is another Kingism of a sort. The use of like a phrase that is seemingly innocent and childish in a context that makes it ominous and scary. And I think that is, in essence, just what Blaine is.
Yeah. It's interesting because the first time he says that thing, it's almost humanizing. It's like, oh, the computer uses it like a verbal tick, like a person would. Mm-hmm. But then he uses it 3 more times, and you're like, oh, okay, that's just weird now. It's just creepy now. I also love, again, the audiobook reader like does it in exactly the same cadence every time, where it's see you later, alligator, after a while, crocodile, don't forget to write. Mm-hmm. It's like it's got a very specific cadence to it, and it's like, oh, that's not a human, it's just a thing that he says to right. to seem human. I get it.
I love when he changes it a little bit later where he says Patricia Gator. I think that's just like it's perfect.
Yes, absolutely.
So the train goes busting through the outer wall of Lud, not busting through it. It calmly goes through. But we get our actual first view of the wastelands, Matt, and they are they're wastelands. And I want to read all of this because I think, you were talking a minute ago about just King's writing, and here I think is one of my favorite bits of it in the entire book. Even Roland felt vertigo twist his gut as the land beneath them seemed to swell upward towards the place where they were floating. The picture which appeared was ugly beyond his past knowledge of ugliness, and that knowledge, sadly, was wide indeed. The lands below had been fused and blasted by some terrible event, the disastrous cataclysm which had driven this part of the world deep into itself in the first place, no doubt. The surface of the earth had become distorted black glass, humped upward into spalls and twists which could not properly be called hills, and twisted downwards into deep cracks and folds which could not properly be called valleys. A few stunted nightmare trees flailed twisted branches at the sky. Under magnification, they seemed to clutch at the travelers like arms of lunatics. Here and there, clusters of thick ceramic pipes jutted through glassy surfaces of the ground. Some seemed dead or dormant, but within others they could see gleams of the eldritch blue-green light, as if titanic forges and furnaces ran on and on in the bowels of the earth. Misshapen flying things which looked like pterodactyls cruised between these pipes on leathery wings, occasionally snapping at each other with their hooked beaks. Whole flocks of these gruesome aviators roasted on the circular tops of other stacks, apparently warming themselves in the updrafts of the internal fires beneath. They passed above a fissure zigzagging along a north-south course like a dead riverbed, except it wasn't deep. It wasn't dead. Deep inside lay a thin thread of deepest scarlet, pulsing like a heartbeat. Other small fissures branched out from this, and Susanna, who had read her Tolkien, thought, this is what Frodo and Sam saw when they reached the heart of Mordor. Though these are the cracks of doom. This is just stunning, Matt. Like I love it. Like I loved it when I pulled it and reading it out loud just then. Like I found like 20 different things I want to talk about in here that are just amazing. It's just powerful writing. I mean, this is the titular wastelands, right? Like this moment had to land, and I think it succeeds beautifully.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, you can take every sentence in this paragraph and talk for 10 minutes about the word choice, mm-hmm. the imagery. I think imagery, they really should use Stephen King to talk about imagery in like high school, because first of all, he's way more entertaining than the authors I remember talking about, but also like just you instantly get it. A few stunted nightmare trees flailed twisted branches at the sky. Under magnification, they seemed to clutch at the travelers like the arms of lunatics. Mm-hmm. Like that is painting a picture in your mind using concepts where like, they don't literally look like arms. but you get it, right?
Yeah, right.
Like and it carries over that connotation, that desperate kind of like insane and disturbing connotation that he wants to carry over from the idea of the arms of lunatics. Mm-hmm. It's just this master of like painting with connotations and feelings.
Yeah, I love the humped upward into spalls and twists which could not be properly called hills, and twisted downwards into deep cracks and folds which could not be properly called valleys. I just think that repetition there of which could not be properly called just really works on me too. Like just this is like nothing in here is normal, and we're going to emphasize that abnormality through just geographic like landmarks that aren't even those aren't even right. Like there are hills and valleys here, but even calling them hills and valleys is disingenuous to what they look like. I love it.
Me too.
I also love the little tiny bit of characterization at the beginning. Even Roland felt vertigo. Like even Roland. And the picture which appeared was ugly beyond his past knowledge of ugliness, and that knowledge, sadly, was wide indeed. Like this is the worst thing Roland of Gilead has ever seen, and Absolutely. He's seen a lot of shit.
Yeah, I like that actually that moment goes well with what comes a bit later, where we're sort of establishing like this ain't nothing new to Roland, but yeah, the wasteland is actually something new to Roland,
right?
It's great. It's so great. You shared with me some pictures, some artist renditions, which I thought were fantastic. I don't know. I think that's the cool thing is like, I just love how horrible this is. Because I was imagining like a desert, maybe like a radioactive desert.
Sure.
Maybe like some ruins of old cities or something like that, like kind of like a Death Valley situation. This is like a Hieronymus Bosch painting. This is a hellish nightmare. It's great.
Exactly. Yeah. And one of the first things that we see here, or at least we have our character say, is Eddie looks at this place and says, "This wasn't nuclear war. Like the nuclear war doesn't do this. This is something else." Yeah. And Blaine is basically like, "Yup," but he doesn't go into any kind of detail.
Yeah. I mean, that's another fun thing is how Blaine really does enjoy fucking with them, because he knows what he's doing there. He knows that they're curious and that they need to know this. And he's like, "Yep." Right. Not going to elaborate. Yeah. So I wanted to talk about the Cracks of Doom.
Sure. Let's do it.
Because, I mean, yeah, we love our Tolkien here. And this is the first time in the book where the author, the characters have been like, this is a thing from Lord of the Rings. Right. and so the Cracks of Doom are, of course, the fissure in like this active volcano where the evil Dark Lord Sauron channels the primal force of the earth to do his evil magics, which is like a very fitting comparison, since it seems like here they're looking at a literal crack in the earth, which is, I don't know, probably safe to assume it's related in some way to evil magic or something. But I learned something really cool today when I was looking up the Crack of Doom, because apparently the Crack of Doom is a play on words. It's almost a pun. The name Cracks of Doom is wordplay on crack of doom from Macbeth, which is spelled in a very Shakespearean way in Macbeth, but it's basically the same thing, except the crack of doom in Macbeth means like the sudden crack of a trumpet that announces the last day. So like the trumpet announcing the end of the world. So here Tolkien is using crack to mean fissure, whereas in Shakespeare he was using crack to mean like the sudden noise. So Macbeth, basically Shakespeare and Macbeth is making a joke about the Bible, and then Tolkien's making a joke about that, and then King is making a riff on that. Yeah. And the original biblical reference, of course, is about the end of the world.
Yeah, that's perfect. I love that. I did not know any of that. I'm sure at some point I remembered Crack of Doom from Macbeth, but I never actually put together the how Tolkien was referencing that. That's really wonderful.
Well, I don't know how I would have ever gotten that Macbeth was referencing the Bible, because I never think of crack as being a sound, but yes, right. Apparently it is supposed to be the sound of the trumpet that announces the end of the world. So
wonderful. Yeah. So having seen the lands that they're now traveling through, Jake suddenly reveals that he knows something else. He knows that Blaine killed all of Lud, but took them aboard for a reason, and not just to hear some riddles, Matt. Blaine is tired of being alive. He's going to commit suicide by crashing into the Topeka station, and he's taking the quartet with him.
So does the book explain this? And I just had a brain problem because I thought his brain was back in Lud.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. You're right, but I think my understanding was basically he's gonna turn himself off. I guess like the crashing is more a symbolic thing.
Okay, I get you. So this is his little swan song, and then that's gonna be it. Okay,
right,
that's
right,
fine.
Yeah. But then Blaine just is the absolute best, and there's actually some interesting information like stuffed in here. So Blaine says, "Would you like a little music? I have over 7,000 concerti in my library, a sampling of over 300 levels. The concerti are my favorites, but I can also offer symphonies, operas, and a nearly endless selection of popular music. You might enjoy some wagog music. The wagog is an instrument, something like the bagpipe. It is played on one of the upper levels of the tower." "Wagog?" Jake asked. Blaine was silent. "What do you mean it's played on one of the upper levels of the tower?" Roland asked. So Blaine, of course, does not answer Roland's question here, Matt, but I'm wondering what you think about this.
No freaking idea. I mean, it's a big kick in the head to our understanding of like what the heck the tower is, because I mean, you're just reeling. You're like, wait, levels? People live there and they play music?
Uh-huh.
Wait, how does Blaine know about this? Is he just full of shit and saying things that he know will drive Roland batty, or like, does he know? What's going on? Is this real? I mean, it's amazing how baffling and thought provoking I found this little vignette to be.
Yeah, and I think you can kind of see, or at least speculate, that he's doing this specifically to fuck with Roland because it works immediately. Like there's a moment later here where Eddie looks at Roland and knows that he's like not thinking about anything else than just what was just said there, that what it was played on one of the upper levels of the tower. He's like immediately like what there's like he's thinking all the same questions you are.
yeah. I mean, of course, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because we want to get to the tower too. Damn it.
Yeah. We do. I didn't pull the slide, and I don't think it's quite here, but we do learn that like Blaine references something called Endworld, which is where the tower is located, and says that he used to have sensors that could detect what's going on there and what's going on with the tower. So that might explain, Matt, why he has knowledge of the tower. But those sensors have he's lost contact with that part of the world a long, long time ago.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. I mean, that explains it as much as anything. Sure.
Mm-hmm.
but what?
I mean,
what?
yeah, it doesn't give you anything. I'm not telling you anything here.
It gives you a tad of a suggestion that he's not just making this up.
Yeah,
I think is what it does. Yeah,
sure. So Blaine, in this moment when they're asking him why he wants to kill himself, he finally tells them his story. Kind of, he has what he calls a spiritual malaise that's causing his insanity. He knows that it's happening. He can feel himself going insane, but he is powerless to stop it. And then he says it's what caused Patricia to end her life. And Blaine was basically planning on doing the same thing. But then the quartet came and offered him a purpose, one last interesting ride to Topeka. And he's explaining all this, and like everyone's questioning him as he goes. And one of my favorite beats of this chapter is that everyone keeps asking him questions like, why? And Jake always like exasperatingly answers, because he's a pain. It's like Jake's mood in this entire chapter is, I'm tired of this shit. And like everyone else is like horrified, and he's just like, yep, this is what I knew was going to happen. Here we are.
it is really interesting how Jake just seems to get at a deep level, like what they're dealing with in a way that none of them necessarily do. Like,
yeah.
I don't know what it is exactly, but he always, it's like when he saw the book and he was like, I don't trust that smile, like immediately. Like he has some insight into Blaine, I think, maybe. Yeah.
I mean, I feel like he's known that this was the inevitability from the beginning. I mean, the first thing he says when he gets to Midworld is, have you found the train yet? So like this has been the inevitable conclusion, and he's just kind of like, yeah, it's really great. I love it.
Yeah, me too.
So we also get this little beat here, Matt, where Blaine says, I had heard rumors, you see, that a gunslinger was once more abroad in the earth. I could scarcely credit such stories, and yet now I see it was wise to wait. Roland stirred in his chair. What rumors did you hear, Blaine? And who did you hear them from? So who could these rumors come from?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it could just be the mysterious ageless stranger of many names. But I also found myself wondering, like, a lot of time has passed since Roland killed the town of Tull.
Mm-hmm.
It's possible that news just traveled ahead of him. Because I mean, he was doing stuff before the gunslinger. He did all that stuff. And then he kind of like went to sleep for 10 years or something.
Yeah, for who knows how many. We think it's about that, yeah.
Yeah, like it looks like he looks 10 years older is kind of what it said, but like we don't really know what we don't know what that was exactly.
Sure.
So for all we know, more time has passed than he realizes or whatever. And like those are the only thoughts I had in terms of like why Blaine would have heard of him.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping you'd say. So good.
Oh,
well
good.
Done. You passed the test.
Oh, thank you. All right.
So his story over, Blaine now demands some riddles. It's riddle time, but Roland isn't having it. I said, fuck you, Roland said calmly. I just said that not calmly, but that's what happens when you forget to read the next part before you say the thing. But if that puzzles you, Blaine, I can make it clear. No. The answer is no. So basically the rest of this chapter and this book, Matt, is Roland just being like a stone cold badass. He's sized Blaine up perfectly and using all of his powers of gunslinging, including the same kind of maneuvering and politicking that Susanna mentioned in him earlier in the book. He just like fucking owns the guy. And I want to read all this. I can't, but I want to but Roland is so wonderful here, right? Like, I can call you a nonsensical, empty-headed, foolish, arrogant machine. I can call you a stupid, unwise creature whose sense is no more than the sound of a winter wind in a hollow tree. Unfortunately, I am somewhat restricted in my ability to be rude, since you are only a machine, what Eddie calls a gadget. I cannot call you a sucker of cocks, for instance, because you have no mouth and no cock. I cannot say you are viler than the vilest beggar who ever crawled in the gutters of the lowest street in creation, because even such a creature is better than you. You have no knees on which to crawl, and would not fall upon them even if you did, for you have no conception of such a human flaw as mercy. I cannot even say you fucked your mother, because you had none. Roland paused for breath. And then everyone around him is like, what are you doing?
Oh, the scene.
It's wonderful.
I mean, this is what I mean about this being a satisfying ending. Like, I get that it's a cliffhanger, but like, as far as the showdown goes, this is the showdown.
Sure.
Like whatever comes after this is the showdown. Roland wins the showdown. It's everything you want it to be. Roland wins by outsmarting, outthinking, outmaneuvering, thinking around corners, being clever, and putting Blaine into the position where he wants him to get the concession that he wants. This is a win. The book ends on a win, and then they're gonna riddle, sure, but it's fine. It's fine because Roland got this moment, and we I mean, on some level we know they're gonna be fine.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, what I love about it is that nobody thinks this is a good idea. Like, none of his companions think it's a good idea. Even little Blaine is like, what are you? Stop it. Don't. Yeah. What? You're going to make him mad. He'll do it. He'll do the things you're talking about. He'll do them. Yeah. Nobody thinks it's a good idea, but Roland has utmost confidence. Like, we don't see him falter. We don't see him doubt himself here. I think it's interesting that the book kind of like removes, like, we're not in his head during this. Like, we don't see him think through this, so we don't even like there if there is a moment of doubt in Roland's head as he's going through the motions of these amazingly worded insults, the book does not let us see it.
No, I don't think he does, because it says he descends into the battle rage. Mm-hmm. This is him fighting as much as if he were in like a some desert town having a shootout, and so I really think he's in gunslinger mode here.
Yeah, it was just another showdown in another empty street. That was all, and that was enough. It was Kef, Ka, and Ka-Tet. That the showdown always came was the central fact of his life and the axle upon which his own Ka revolved, which is another great reference to the wheel in a different way. That the battle would be fought with words instead of bullets this time made no difference. It would be a battle to the death just the same. The stench of killing in the air was as clear and definite as the stench of exploded carrion in a swamp. Ugh, it's so good. It's so good.
This reminded me a lot about conversation I think from last week about how Roland is just a badass, right? Like these are the sorts of hints that I love in this book, where the book will just be like sort of throw in there, like, of course, this was only the third time Roland had seen someone have a gun shot out of their hand and then have the bullet explode inside the chamber and then blow off their face. And it's like, what kind of life do you have to live where you see that more than 0 times?
Right.
And it just these things where it just tosses in like there are moments where I'm like, how old is he? Like he's had this incredibly violent life, just full of like endless showdowns and battle and adventure, and he's like infinitely jaded and experienced, and but yet it works, right? Like I think that was what I said last week, is like there's a risk that you have your character who is just so badass that you sort of don't care anymore. You're like, yeah, well, they'll get out of it just fine. But King has managed to take this character who he establishes as being so awesome that we just love him, and yet put him in situations where we're still like, oh, I don't know about this one. So yeah, I don't know. I love the peppering in of like his long storied past throughout the story.
Yeah, you're right, and that's great. And so much of Roland's past has been shaded from us, so just the hints of it make like it sets your mind alight. I really like it. It made me think of a conversation we had a few weeks ago on our Brandon Sanderson book club, which, not to rag on Brandon Sanderson, I quite enjoy his books, but he talks about characters that are witty and then they're not actually that witty. Roland's insults here are so fucking amazing and so witty. I just love that. Like, they're crude in some ways, but then clever in other ways. Like, sometimes they're crude, but like you can't suck your own cock is not very witty, right? That's just, but like, I can't call you the vilest beggar because you have on no knees on which to crawl and would not fall upon them even if you did, for you have no conception of such a human flaw as mercy. It's so good. It's so good. I can call you a faithless creature who let your only companion kill herself, a coward who is delighted in the torture of the foolish and the slaughter and the innocent, a lost and bleeding mechanical goblin. It's just the language is just beautiful.
It is. Yeah, it's I think what's funny is this is a diss, but it is beautiful.
Yeah,
it is gorgeously written. I just love like the detail of how Roland rarely uses contractions, and that makes it even better, where he's like, I cannot call you a sucker of cocks. It just stings so much more than I can't call you a sucker of cocks. I don't know. Just details like that and consistency, I think, is what it is, you know.
Right.
Unfortunately, I am somewhat restricted in my ability to be rude. He's so formal, you know.
Right. Yeah, and I think sorry for those of you listening out loud. I hope your children don't hear us say the phrase sucker of cocks 12 times in a row, but like, cocksucker versus sucker of cocks is the latter is formal in exactly that kind of way that makes this like bam, like calling someone a cocksucker is calling someone, like saying I can't even call you a sucker of cocks. It's just so much better. It's so much better.
It is. I'm glad that we were able to spend several minutes analyzing this delightful teardown of Blaine.
Yeah,
it's great.
And I think even like, he doesn't say it exactly, but there's even a moment during this teardown when Jake is like, yes.
Right.
Drag him.
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, basically the whole crew is like sitting there doing the faces, you know.
Yeah. But like Eddie in particular is losing his mind, freaking out. But Jake's just like, yeah. Got him. Yeah. It's really funny.
Yeah.
Roland, at the end of this like incredible teardown, manages to get Blaine to apologize to them for being rude, which is perfect. And then he convinces Blaine that they'll play his game, but the only way they'll play his game is if they get something out of it in return. They basically offer him a deal. We'll give you all the riddles we have, either in the book or through Roland's head, during their trip to Topeka. If he solves them all, he wins and gets to kill them. If they manage to stump him, he will free them at the Topeka exit to go on their quest. And Blaine accepts the challenge, Matt. He accepts the challenge. So here we go. We got our stakes for the next book because we're leaving it behind here. But perhaps my favorite part at the end of the story. And I know I've said that like 6 times, and it's because I like the end of this book a lot. But when Blaine accepts, he just doesn't say very well. He says, very well, Roland of Gilead. Very well, Eddie of New York. Very well, Susanna of New York. Very well, Jake of New York. And then lastly, very well, Oi of Midworld. Oi looked up briefly at the sound of his name. You are Katet, one made from many. So am I. So we've had this ongoing question since Jake joined Midworld of, hey, is Oi part of the Katet, or is he just like a peripheral character who's going to be used and then tossed? And I think this makes it pretty textually clear that Oi of Midworld is not only a part of their Katet, but at least according to Blaine the Mono, an equal part of their Katet, worthy enough of getting his own title, and he is part of the deal. Yeah,
sure. I think it's interesting because I don't know like why exactly or how exactly Blaine would know that, because I guess I just assume Blaine is like aware of everything that happens in Lud, and probably saw all that stuff that happened, and he gives Oi full credit, which is interesting, right? Because he's a machine, so it just seems like a very meaningful step to have the evil demon train identify Oi that way. So yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I love Oi. I've been excited to talk about Oi since we started this thing, and I can now say he's part of the team.
Yeah,
our 5-man band is together.
Yeah, I smiled so hard when his name was said too, because I was kind of wondering as he's going through each of them, I'm like, oh, is he going to say Oi? And then he does, and I just like grinned hugely.
Yeah, and it feels like King knows that, right? Because that's why he put him last. Like it's very. And of course, like it's the order they joined, right? It's Roland, Eddie, Susanna, Jake, and then lastly Oi. And it's like the little Oi looked up briefly at the sound of his name. He's like, "What? Me? I didn't agree to that. What? No,
yeah,
I can't do the riddle thing."
Yeah, that was one thing I wondered is like, oh, is Blaine gonna like make Oi participate in the riddling somehow?
Right.
And
it's just like a trap. I'd be like, okay, Oi, you must give me the riddle now.
Right. Yeah. Or like you all must answer one riddle correctly, and then they agree to it, and then he's like, all right, starting with you, Oi. So something along those lines. I was immediately like, oh no, it's gonna be a trap.
Yeah. Well, they don't have to answer the riddles.
Yeah, you're right.
They've got to ask them. So,
you're right,
yeah.
but then I was like, but is he gonna turn it on him in that way or something like that?
Right. Yeah. I mean, there is like we are not trustful of Blaine at all, and we have nothing to believe he's gonna stick to the bargain. Really.
Yeah. True.
Other than the dressing down from Roland here.
I did really like how he ends it, where he says, "You are a Katet, one made from many. So am I." And like, first of all, it's really fucking cool.
Yeah.
But also, what does that mean? Like, because I think I said previously, like, what if he is like the synthesis of all of the AIs that used to live in Lud?
Yeah.
And I mean, that's as close as we get to any kind of confirmation of that idea.
Yeah, you could also argue that he exists because of the greatest minds of the old ones coming together to create him. So that's literally one thing made from many people.
I like that a lot too.
Yeah. So just as the contest begins, the book comes to an end, and you've already talked about how you like the cliffhanger, that's satisfying to you, and I think your reasoning is good. I totally agree with you that we get a satisfying end through Roland's success, and so I think it would be a different thing if like the contest started and then we cut off. I think that would be more annoying than, okay, Roland has won the first of what is going to need to be many victories against Blaine if they're going to survive this thing. He's won the first round. The next round is the riddling round.
Yeah.
And round 2 begins in book 4.
And it just seems like the actual riddling between them is just another plot movement. It's just that's the next plot movement. There's no need for that to be in this story.
Sure.
It just feels very natural to me.
Yeah, so. and I mean, King talks about that in his author's note at the end of the book. We don't normally talk about these, but I think this one is worth talking about because he kind of, I think, anticipates some grumblings that are going to happen because of this cliffhanger. So he says, hey, look, like sometimes books write themselves, and this book felt like this is where it needed to end. And when I've pushed against that feeling and tried to push on and make it longer, It's ended up unsatisfying for me. So this is where it felt that it needed to end. He says, yet books which write themselves, as this one did for the most part, must be allowed to end themselves. And I can assure you, reader, that Roland and his bands have come to one of the critical border crossings in their story, and we must leave them here for a while at the customs station, answering questions and filling out forms. All of which is simply a metaphorical way of saying that this was over again for a while, and my heart was wise enough to stop me from trying to push ahead anyway, which is wonderful. Yeah. But Matt, there's one more thing we got to talk about in here.
Please.
The course of the next volume is still murky, although I can assure you that the business of Blaine the Mono will be resolved, that we will all find out a good deal more about Roland's life as a young man, and that we will be reacquainted with both the TikTok man and that puzzling figure Walter, called the Wizard or the Ageless Stranger.
Oh, Steven. See, okay, so as soon as I saw this, I literally laughed because I was like, he's just fucking with us. because in the previous, I don't know if it was the previous book or the one before, but in one of the other author's notes, or maybe it was the preface, I don't remember exactly.
It was the preface, yeah.
Yeah. Somewhere in there he says, oh yes, and of course Martin is the same person as Walter.
Yeah.
And you're like, what? That wasn't in the book. If anything, I'm pretty sure that was contradicted in the book. Uh-huh. And here he's saying, and of course, the mysterious ageless stranger who is so weird. Yeah, that's Walter also.
Yeah.
And you're just like, oh, come on. like you're messing with us, right? Like this isn't in the book.
Why wouldn't you put that in the book, right?
Yeah. Well, and then I'm like, is it supposed to be is that supposed to be the point? Is like these are kind of all the same guy, but kind of not, but they're kind of manifestations of the same force. I don't know. I mean, it's funny to me that he's done this twice now, though. It's very funny to me.
Yeah, I mean, it makes I think that the conclusion you have to come to is that the answer to that question is yes, but also no. Right? Like you kind of have to, because what else can you say at this point?
Right.
Yes, they are all the same person, but also no, they're not the same person. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the interesting thing is I've debated going into this because this is all extra textual, right? Like technically it is still in the book in that it is in between the bindings of the book, but it is not in the story. The story has not said this. It's King saying this himself. But it's available to read at the end of the book and at the beginning of the book. So it's worth discussing, I think, because it is kind of, these things aren't clear cut, and he's doing that on purpose.
That's the thing. And I think that's what makes it valid to talk about, is that like he's having fun with us. I really do think that. I don't think it's random that he does this thing with Walter's identity twice in two different extra textual bits, you know? So that to me is like, okay, he's playing, what is the game here? What is he doing? And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's just a coincidence. I don't know. Yeah. I did have one like parting thought, and I guess we'll have the chance to talk about this kind of thing next week too, I guess. But
sure.
It just occurred to me like that the TikTok man is Saruman. Because Saruman has a mind of metal and wheels and wants to make everything orderly, and lives in a stronghold in the middle of his city and is a boss of orcs, but is also supernaturally better than them.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
I like it. Cool. All right. So let's move on. I think let's just move right into discussion questions. We got a lot of answers this week. I'm very excited by the talk that happened here. So let's go through them one at a time. All right. The question once again was, why did Roland save Jake this time? And up first, we have DataSnake69, who said, simply put, this time, Roland didn't have to choose between Jake and the tower. His problem has never been that he didn't want to protect the others, just that they were never higher than second place on his list of priorities. That's I think, probably the most pessimistic answer we've gotten, but I do think there's truth to that, because I think we talked about that back in the Gunslinger, that when Jake was being pulled away by the slow mutants, Roland saved him from them. But it was when Ka and the Man in Black and the world made it as clear as crystal that this choice will result in loss of the tower is when he let Jake go.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're exactly right that this is the most maybe cynical way of framing it, but also that doesn't mean it's wrong, right?
Sure.
Yeah, I think this is probably my kind of first thought too, and then I was like, well, but I want there to be more to it. Though.
Right.
I want there to be more. Yeah.
You want the man to have changed a little bit over the course of the last 2 books.
Yeah, exactly. Jerk Stabworthy says sacrificing Jake in the Gunslinger was his only way to catch the Man in Black and in turn gain the tower. I honestly believe that at this point in the story, if he had to make the same decision again, he would. It would destroy him to do it, but Ka. The difference now is that he has Eddie and Susanna, both gunslingers in their own right. In the worst case scenario, Roland, Jake, and Oy all die either at the hands of the Greys or in the poison gas, although he knows nothing of this at the time. Simply put, Roland trusts Eddie and Susanna to make it out, and even if he himself doesn't, he knows that Eddie craves the tower. Maybe not as much as he does, but that in time his addictive personality will compel him forward to it. Susanna may not be as dedicated to the cause yet, but he has seen their love and knows that it will compel her to stand with her husband. Roland still wants the tower, but he rescues Jake because he loves him and realizes that now there are others on the path. So he has an insurance policy should he fail. I like this because I think it humanizes Roland while sticking with his pragmatism. He trusts Eddie and Susanna with the great quest and is willing to give it all up for the son he already sacrificed once before. I really like this answer a lot because, like they say, it's still sort of cynical, but it also gives him a bit of a positive quality, which is trust. So yeah, that's great. I love this.
Yeah. I agree with that. I wonder, do you think at this point Roland would be satisfied by the idea that, okay, I'm going to die, but someone else will get to the tower? Or does he need, is it at this point, getting to the tower means saving the world, and that's what's important to me? Or is it, I need to see what's there that's important to him? I'm not sure if I know the answer to that question yet.
I don't think he'd be satisfied with that, but I think he might accept it. You know, like if he had to, he desperately wants to see it, I think. But also I think that he might be okay not seeing it as long as he trusts that Eddie will get there. For example, to take the premise of the answer. Okay.
Yeah. Cool. Up next, we have Megafire7, who says Roland saved Jake's life this time because when he failed to do so last time, it quite literally tore his mind apart with guilt, and he didn't want to go through that again. Clearly, this means he learned his lesson from letting him die last. No. Obviously, Roland hasn't learned his lesson that sacrificing people for his quest is bad because he was perfectly willing to let Oy dive to save Jake. It's just that sacrificing Jake now is unconscionable to him. I don't think Roland's cold-hearted, though. He's not literally thinking, well, letting Jake die apparently fucks me up, so let's not do that. Everyone else is just fine, though. It's just that he hasn't quite connected letting people die to feeling terrible about myself and my choices yet. I think Roland would feel awful and tear himself apart if Oy had died here. He just doesn't realize it yet, and he won't get a second chance at this one if he screws it up.
Yeah. I think that, this is a good way of saying that he's partway through his journey, right? He's sort of learned the lesson in a very narrow sense, and he needs to learn it in a more general sense deep in his heart. Because otherwise, I think the world is going to keep punishing him if he keeps making the choice that he's been making. Because it's that idea of if a monster were to gain the tower, then that's the worst possible outcome. That'd be worse than if he never gets there in the first place. And being the kind of person who would sacrifice the lovable little raccoon dog, that's fairly monstrous. Still not as bad as sacrificing a boy. Still not great.
Yeah, totally.
Cool. The Amazing Duck 42 says, I think that the reason Roland saved Jake this time around is because he is regaining his humanity. It's not all there. It may never be, based on the type of person he is and the things he has suffered in his past. But he spent years, and they say decades, millennia, wandering the desert on this single-minded Man in Black quest, and he lost himself in the desert. It's a common theme in literature, the nomad wandering, losing oneself in the desert of your mind, etc. And I think King was drawing a direct comparison here. When Roland let Jake fall, he was just barely out of the desert, just starting his path back to humanity. He has inklings of connection and empathy, something I think King values because a lot of King's horror is subverting those connections. But with Roland starting to think that he loved the boy, but not being able to say it or really even mentally approach the idea, we were shown that he hadn't regained enough humanity to be able to put people above his quest. Now that he has been out of the desert for a while and is interacting with other humans again, he is getting that part of himself back that he has lost. He is seeing the value of human connection, though his love for the rest of the quartet, through his love for the rest of the quartet and their love for each other. He is reminded of the strength they have together and is becoming less of a monster that ruthlessly kills anything in his path and more of a human. He still has his lapses, like when he was prepared to sacrifice Oi, but he's getting there, making progress. And purely speculatively, it does make me think of how his reception at River Crossing would have differed if he had come through on his own as opposed to with his Tet. Would the residents have still fed and watered him? Would they still have been welcoming or even remotely happy to see him? I honestly don't think so. I think they would have hid, terrified of the monster that walked its way down their streets.
I love that. I love that speculation there. Like, I think there's something to that like the Roland we saw in the Gunslinger would not have been greeted this way because he didn't look like a gunslinger. I mean, he was, but like he didn't, like the holy religious side of him was kind of not there.
Yeah, well, like they make a much more approachable cadre when there's like the little boy with him and there's the cute little Billy Bumbler and
yeah, sure, and
there's a woman with them who, you know, she's missing her legs, and it kind of suggests that they're all willing to care for this person. Like it's very different, paints a very different picture than this haggard, stony-eyed man, right? Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
I like this answer. It's a very rich answer.
It was. I liked it a lot. Next, we have Brian J., who says, storytelling is all about how things change from one thing into something else. Usually, that's character development and growth. And I think that's what we're seeing here. Roland is a character who is resistant to change. He's constant and unwavering to a fault at times, and I think we see some of that in his backstory. It seems like Roland learns slowly from his mistakes, but he does learn. He lost his original contact with Elaine and Cuthbert. He let Jake fall, and he remembers that as he's slowly trying to change to avoid repeating those actions. Now, he has a new contact, and Jake has been returned to him, and he's showing his capacity to change his past mistakes rather than repeating them. I think that's what we're seeing here, is how Roland is dealing with his second chances. Yeah, that's a very encouraging answer. I agree with that. It's weird because I'm like halfway between these where I look at Brian's answer and I'm like, yes, absolutely, fuck yes, he's doing great. And then I see other people's answers that are like, it's just he just hasn't had it hasn't been laid out to him quite as clearly yet, and he would totally do it again. And I'm like, I think you're right about that too.
Yeah, I mean, I like this idea focusing on Roland, like the sort of plodding, uncurious and unreflective mode of Roland, where it's gonna take him a long time to learn the lesson that he's supposed to learn here. That I would say the book and the universe is trying to teach him, because he's just not the kind of person who would be like, am I the baddie? Like that would just never occur to him. So it's gonna take a lot more pain, I think, before he learns that lesson.
Yeah.
So I do think that means, yeah, he'd still make the bad choice, but I think he's capable of learning that lesson ultimately.
Yeah. I mean, change doesn't happen overnight, right? It's baby steps. You gotta make baby steps.
Yeah, baby steps. Baby
step one, not letting a horrible cult take your friend.
Yes, there you go.
All right.
Next answer from Jason Z. In my interpretation, I feel that as Roland nears closer to the tower, he starts to redefine what Ka means, or at least his ability to understand it. From the moment he catches up to the man in black, Ka starts to shift from a mystical force that governs his actions or inactions into a living, breathing, and seemingly changing energy that cannot be trusted or predicted. Until he draws his Ka-tet, Roland seems to feel very confident in his mission and almost regarding Ka as a very linear driving force. But from the moment he opens the first door, Roland is faced with the reality that there is much that he does not yet understand. As the group is formed, Roland has to accept that Ka is a bigger son of a bitch than he remembered. But along with that, I think he realizes that maybe, just maybe, Ka is less of a one-way street and more of a reciprocal force. Ka seems different from Destiny, which is predetermined and absolute. Ka seems to be responsive. So it seems like Roland matures a bit emotionally and spiritually. His love for his current quartet is reflective of his childhood friends, but he is no longer a child. In his older age, he has learned that he needs to have a stronger has he learned that he needs to have a stronger faith in Ka? Or has he determined that, Ka be damned, I made an oath that I will not let this boy die again? I feel it's a bit of both. As our other characters' growth is in a hardening and strengthening manner, Roland's growth seems to soften him a bit. Not in a way that makes him any less formidable as a gunslinger, but maybe in a way to better prepare him for things to come.
Cool.
I love that. I might even say that it makes him a better gunslinger to be a bit softer.
Yeah, maybe.
To be a bit more pliable in a certain sense, a bit more flexible.
Sure. Yeah, they've been talking about the hardening that is necessary, but yeah, maybe he's wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think to borrow a phrase from a completely different series, I think if you're too hard, then there's a danger of snapping.
Sure.
Yeah, I love the idea that it's not just our perception of Ka that is maturing, but it is Roland's perception of Ka that is maturing over the course of the books. I think that's I really want to sit with that, actually, because I like that perspective a lot.
Sure. Next, we have Alistair C., who says, I believe Roland went to save Jake because of his devotion to Ka. Since drawing Eddie, Susanna, and Jake, Roland has begun to see the group as his new quartet and being their leader. It's on Roland to be the one that finds their newest member. Roland knows the only way he makes it to the Dark Tower is with the quartet, and losing a member this early would spell failure for the rest of the quest. Also, relationship-wise, Roland is the closest to Jake after their adventure in the first book, and also with him being a paternal figure to Jake. I don't see Eddie or Susanna having the same success as Roland did in finding Jake, as they aren't as experienced as gunslingers yet. And story-wise, having the romantic couple discover the reality of Ludd feels more right. Yeah, I agree with that. I think, just story-wise, splitting Eddie and Susanna off on their own, having Roland be the one that saves Jake makes a lot of sense, just narratively. And I agree. It is also a little bit pragmatic to say, like, he's just doing it because the quest will fail unless he has everyone at this point. The quest is not saying you must sacrifice this person for its success. Its success hinges upon your quartet forming, which again is kind of pessimistic a little bit, but I think there could be some truth to that as well.
Very much on the cynical side of the axis. And yet I can't say I disagree, and I can't say it's wrong.
Right. Absolutely.
Pedro De Niro 77 says, what has really changed? Ultimately, Roland has replaced Jake with Oi to sacrifice in order to move forward because the Bumbler's long-term utility isn't directly in his field of view, so to speak. Roland has progressed enough to see that Jake means more than only what he can do for Roland's quest, but not far enough to extend that to Oi. In this way, Roland is the tower. Ultimately, his battle between his own light, love, and darkness, pure utilitarianism, is the central theme of the story, and we see the reflections of this in every step of the story. Roland is the last vestige of a world that has moved on, and as he loses himself, surely we are all lost.
I love that.
Scott, how many stories are we going to cover that are about utilitarianism versus humanity?
Look, man, it's a popular thing to discuss. I think it's a really rich thematic area to explore because it's just like, it just makes so much sense logically to pick the choice that is for the greatest good, right?
Sure.
But everything about, I think, the way we work as creatures, as animals, as people, says that feels wrong. Yeah. And so a story that really dives into those opposing ideas is just really interesting.
Yeah. I love it. I love it as a theme. So I'm not actually complaining. I was being silly. I think that's a great point.
All right. Cool. Last but not least, we have Fabi Chupi. Sorry if I said that wrong. They say, when Roland sacrificed Jake under the mountains, he did so on his way to the tower. He was more or less on the path of the beam. The sacrifice therefore happened as part of that linear progression in his pursuit of the tower. Here, it is emphasized that Roland and Jake have left the path of the beam. What happened is wrong. It's not supposed to be a part of their journey, not the way of Ka. If Ka is seen as sentient being, or at least a thing with a will, we can argue that Ka doesn't want this to happen. Roland even mentions that only Ka saved him from the traps. Roland is very aware of Ka, maybe even subconsciously. So my theory is that Roland knows letting Jake die is not an option. It would break their quartet, which was only mentioned after all of them got together, and strongly connects them to the point that they have a telepathic connection with each other. Jake is not supposed to die, and therefore he saves him. Man, y'all are pessimistic.
Yeah. Well, I didn't actually
Cynical.
count it up, but it does seem like about half of the answers were way on the cynical side, and about half were on the he's capable of learning and growth side. Which, I mean, I think that's the thing is I agree with the take that right now he's not there yet, but also I think that he will be. And if he's not, I'll be really like sad.
I love Fabi Chupi, and again, sorry if I'm saying this wrong. Please forgive me. I love their take on, like we talked about this in our episode, that the book makes it very explicit that they have left the path of the beam. So I love that. I love that. Although I do think when they are in the cradle of the Greys, they are back on the path of the beam because they are directly under the cradle of Lud, I believe.
So it's almost like he willingly leaves the path of the beam and in pursuit of Jake, and his pursuit of Jake actually just leads him back onto the path of the beam because that's Ka for you, baby.
Yeah. I think that's Ka baby is my favorite thing that we've said.
Yeah. We gotta make those bumper stickers.
Yeah, we do. I think Steven would have something to say about that.
Probably.
Great answers, everyone. I loved your answers. I love all your takes. I love how some of you had very similar takes, but you approach them in different ways. This is why we love the discussion questions, because like polling the audience is really a great way to see the story from different lenses.
Me too.
All right. Next week, we do not have a discussion question. Instead, what we do on our overview episodes is we let you guys ask the questions. So this is the time where you ask us questions. We call it a mailbag. You send us all your questions, and we answer as many of them as we can in the allotted time. So you can ask us questions about this book. You can ask Matt about all 3 books so far, about what he's thinking about the series, where he thinks the series is going to go from here. Ask whatever you want. You can ask us questions about some other stuff, although we're going to try to kind of keep it to Stephen Kingy. So you can submit those questions via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com, on our Twitter account @doofmedia, or on our Reddit. That's r/doofmedia. There will be a post for this episode right there, so you can submit them any of those ways. Please say if it's email, please say Wastelands mailbag in the email, so I know what I'm looking for. So yeah, that's the next week's questions. It's questions for us. So that's it. We're done. Next week, we will be taking one final look at the Wastelands as a whole before we compare to move on to the biggest novel in the series, Wizard and Glass. Matt, we're starting that in 2 weeks, and we'll be there all through summer. We'll be there through August, I believe. We'll be on Wizard and Glass because it's a big book. And like I said, next week we'll have a special guest joining us to nerd out about Stephen King and the Wastelands a little bit. So look forward to that.
Awesome. Can't wait for that. Remember, of course, that you can reach out to us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter @doofmedia. You can also head on over to reddit.com/r/doofmedia to participate in the question and answer, the discussions about this week's chapter, or any other sorts of discussions that you see going on over there.
Absolutely. And if you are not already subscribed to Kingslingers, we strongly recommend you do so, because you'll never miss a single episode. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else you can listen to podcasts. Those places also have every single one of our other shows.
That's right. Of which there are several.
So many. So many. You can see all of them at doofmedia.com.
Yeah. And if you like any of our shows and you want to support them, consider donating to our Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia. If you donate to us at the $20 per month level, then you will be able to select a movie or a short story for us to do an episode on our variety show, The Doofcast. This also gives you tons of other cool benefits, like the Discord server, which is super happening right now. So head on over to patreon.com/doofmedia and check us out. Special thanks this week to new patrons, of which there are a few.
There's so many.
We have Bedoofs, Jack L, Taylor S, Farrell, Foxy D, Dr. Himbo, Comb Jelly, Spencer M, Michael B, Bernie, Taco Tabac, M, Camilla S, Victoria B, and NCMS. We have new Doof dancers, Farrell, Austin H, and Alexa B. We have new Doof troopers, Robin T and Vic. And we have new Supreme Leader Doof, Dadanista. Whoa.
Guys, holy crap. Thank you so much. That's a whole bunch since last week. I don't know how many of these people are listening to this show, but if you are and you heard your name, thank you personally.
Yeah.
and thanks to all of you guys that take the time and the money to support us financially. We are a completely patron funded organization. So we only do this because you guys allow us to do it. You make it happen. So we really appreciate that.
Yeah. We don't run ads on any of our podcasts on the network. And so, the thing that keeps us running is these patron dollars.
Absolutely.
So welcome.
Welcome. Yes. Welcome to the community. Very happy to have you. Our names are silly if you haven't noticed that already. If you cannot afford to donate to us right now, of course, that's absolutely okay. There are still tons of ways of helping us out. We've been getting emails from people that have been saying they've been sharing the podcast with all their Dark Tower quartets and friends and everything, and that makes me so happy to hear. So thank you, all of you that are sharing the podcast. We actually got an email from the person who responded to the Reddit thread that caused us to blow up, so thank you so much for doing that, everyone. Please, maybe just every couple months, just pop into r/books and just be like, yeah, here's this podcast. Just not like every day, but like every other
3
day.
days. Yeah.
Of course, another great way of helping us out is leaving us a rating and a review. This week's Spotlight review comes from Millie Smalls, who gives us 5 stars and says, "This podcast is outstanding. I've read the series twice and listened on audiobook once, and this podcast is allowing me to take another run through it. Only this time I'm getting insight and observation that I may not have seen going through it on my own. Awesome podcast. Thanks, guys. Shared." Well, thank you, Millie Smalls, for both reviewing and sharing. We really appreciate that.
Yeah, that's so kind.
All right, folks, that is it for us. We will see you back here next week as we complete Book 3 of The Dark Tower, The Wastelands. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.
Look at that, under 2 hours. Woo woo!